It's not every day we get a new generation of consoles to play video games on. In fact, it's more like every 7 years or so. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get my hands on either of the new consoles yet. Aren't scalpers great? Well, I'm sure I'll get one eventually, but until then I figured it would be appropriate to look back on the previous generation of consoles before diving into the new one and give some acknowledgement to the 10 games that I got the most out of during the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 lifecycle. Obviously, I can't play every game that comes out, and there are some pretty big titles I haven't played yet from the last generation. Games like The Witcher 3, Metal Gear Solid 5, Bloodborne, Death Stranding, and many more. So some of the usual suspects for a list like this might not make it on. Generally, when people make lists like this, they don't put more than one game from a series or franchise on, but I subscribe to no such reservations. Now, I didn't spend an overly long amount of time when it came to deciding the order of this list, so don't take this list too seriously. This is meant to just be a fun video acknowledging my favorite games of last gen. So here are my top 10 favorite games of the last generation. Number 10, Batman Arkham Knight. The Arkham franchise began during the 360 and PS3 generation of consoles, but ended during the last generation. And depending on who you ask, that end might have been a great final chapter in the series, or a bit of a disappointing finale. Although if you played it on the PC at launch, it was just disappointing no matter who you asked. Personally, I fall into the category of gamer that was satisfied with the conclusion to Rocksteady's Arkham games. The game was utterly gorgeous when it came out, and it still holds up very well. The free-flow combat that Arkham popularized is as strong as ever, and the Batmobile was free to drive around the open world of Gotham, although the game might have relied on the Batmobile a little too much, especially its tank mode, which definitely didn't kill anyone, I promise. The game's story really honed in on the psychological aspect of Batman, as some of the best Batman stories in the comics have done, and while there were some plot twists that any Batman fan could see coming from a mile away, Rocksteady weren't afraid to end the story in a way that actually felt final. I can't say I'm too excited for Rocksteady's next project, a Suicide Squad game, or the next Batman related game, Gotham Knights, but at the very least, the Arkham series will always be there. Number 9, Dragon Age Inquisition. As far as I'm concerned, this was the last great BioWare game we got, cause after this one there was Andromeda, which, while not a terrible game in my opinion, was certainly disappointing, and then whatever the fuck Anthem was. Inquisition continued the tradition of having a new protagonist for each Dragon Age game, but there were quite a few familiar faces and returning characters that showed up. Inquisition's main plot and villain aren't really anything that special, but the characters are what make the story and the game so compelling, which is par for the course with BioWare games really. Inquisition takes the formula of the previous Dragon Age games and expands on it, taking multiple open world-esque maps and filling them with things to explore and side quests to complete. Not everything you can do in these maps is that interesting, but for a first try at this world design, it was successful enough, I'd say. The combat and RPG systems are great thanks to the tactical pause feature, which lends a nice strategic element to the combat, and the various paths and abilities you can choose for each class breeds depth and diversity among your party. The war table also makes for a nice addition that helps keep the stakes high. Inquisition isn't my favorite of the series, but it's certainly an excellent game, and if BioWare can get their shit together and make a game at least half as good as this one for the next Dragon Age game, I'll be happy. Number 8, Spider-Man. When Batman Arkham Asylum came out in 2009, it instantly became the best superhero game ever made, and I was hoping that it would herald the beginning of a new age of superhero/comic book games, an age where the likes of Marvel and DC came to recognize the critical and commercial success of Arkham Asylum and realize the value of making more quality standalone superhero games. Like, can you imagine a Daredevil game given the same kind of treatment as an Arkham game, or a Thor game in the style of God of War? That would be so sick. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. We did get a few games over the years, like the Injustice games, which are great, and the Avengers game, which sucks ass. Thankfully, though, Insomniac did step up to the plate in 2018 and released what many people consider to be the defining Spider-Man video game, myself included. Swinging through Insomniac's version of New York is exhilarating and just plain fun, even if the open world stuff you can do in the game isn't that exciting. I still did all of it, 100%ing the game game because I just enjoyed swinging around the world so much. The game also has a fantastic combat system, plenty of upgrades for your gadgets and skills, lots of different suits to unlock and wear with no microtransactions, and a wonderful Spider-Man story that perfectly captures the spirit of Spider-Man. It's one of those games like Arkham Asylum that I can recommend to people who aren't fans of the IP because it's that great of a game. Spider-Man Miles Morales was a good sequel/spin-off, but I can't wait to see where the full sequel will take the series. Number 7. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. The Uncharted franchise is probably my favorite PlayStation franchise. Uncharted 2 was one of those defining moments in my gaming experience that has remained as one of my favorite games I've ever played. Uncharted 4 shows us an older Nathan Drake after having settled down with Elena and putting an end to his globe-trotting and life-threatening adventures. Nate doesn't feel completely satisfied with his normal lifestyle and is given an opportunity to go on one last adventure when his long-lost brother shows up asking for his help. Uncharted 4's story is a more mature take on the characters and relationships that they have and examines the cast in a much more successful and less repetitive way than Uncharted 3 attempted to do. It also has the strongest gameplay in the series with improvements to the combat, exploration, and stealth. A Thief's End experimented a bit with having larger and more open maps to explore, and I think it was a nice improvement. I haven't played Uncharted Lost Legacy yet, so there's still one Uncharted experience for me to play. Well, aside from Uncharted Golden Abyss, which I also haven't played. I don't know if Naughty Dog is finished with the Uncharted franchise or if it's going to continue in some way outside of the movie, which is definitely going to come out, but this was the end of Nathan Drake's story, and what an ending it was. Number 6. Ghost of Tsushima. I've always felt that Sucker Punch was a criminally underrated developer, thanks to my experience playing through the Sly Cooper games and especially the Infamous games, and Ghost of Tsushima is the game that finally shone the spotlight on Sucker Punch. Ghost of Tsushima tells a great story of the Mongol invasion of Tsushima Island and of Jin Sakai, a samurai who has to become something else in order to save his home, the Ghost. Jin's story is one of conflicting ideals and ideologies of understanding the limitations of tradition and doing what is necessary in order to save one's home, even at great personal cost. The game also has some exceptional deep combat, breathtakingly gorgeous visuals, and innovative open-world game design that elevates and innovates beyond the genre standards. Now that Sucker Punch has finally been given the recognition they deserve, I am very curious to see where they go from here, and if they can continue to pump out great game after great game. Number 5. God of War. I've played every game in the God of War franchise and consider myself a fan of the series. And while there are certain things about God of War 4 that were changed from previous games that I'm not too sure I feel make the game better, like removing the jump mechanic or bringing the camera so far in even during combat, it still is probably my favorite game in the series. I like narrative-driven single-player games. I always have and I always will, and God of War is definitely the most story-driven game in the franchise. Kratos was never a one-note character. The original God of War games characterized Kratos pretty well, but the newest one did dig deeper into his character than the previous games did. The game is beautiful, switching out the ancient Greek mythological setting that the series is known for with an ancient Nordic mythological setting, accompanied by a whole new pantheon of gods and a menagerie of creatures to battle with, like witches and dragons. The dynamic between Kratos and Atreus, father and son, is what makes the game, however, and while the story stumbles with its pacing and some odd choices at times, it results in a very satisfying tale for both series veterans and newcomers. Sony Santa Monica was very bold with its reimagined vision of what God of War could be, and while it definitely didn't please everyone, I think they were pretty successful in breathing new life in a series that seemed like it had run out of steam. Number 4. Doom Eternal. id Software shows once again that nobody does shooters better than them with Doom Eternal, the best first-person shooter I've ever played. Doom Eternal is so damn good at what it does that I don't really know how it can be topped. The combat is refined, intense, and exhilarating. The levels are so well designed and unashamed to be video gamey in their presentation and construction, and the music, dear God, the music, come on man. The demonic horde that you get to eviscerate with your amazing guns are some of the best designed enemies I've ever had the pleasure to shoot at in a game. And while the asymmetrical multiplayer mode isn't the reason to get the game, it's a nice addition that I can see some people sinking their teeth into. Doom Eternal is my game of the year for 2020, and if you like first-person shooters, action games, or just good fucking games in general, you should absolutely give it a shot. Number 3. Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2 was my game of the year for 2019, and with good reason. It's incredible. I've never played the original RE2, so even though I knew some things about the game, it was all very new for me. Exploring the environments of RE2 like the sewers, the underground lab, and the RCPD police station was an adventure full of suspense, atmosphere, and horror, especially once Mr. X shows up to give it to you, chase you around the station. RE2 Make is just the best parts of classic Resident Evil brought into the modern age. The guns are awesome, the zombies are back, and while they might take a few too many bullets to the head to put down, they are a legitimate threat that will take you down if you're not careful. You do have an out if they grab onto you though, thanks to the sub-weapon system that gives you a chance to escape at the cost of a valuable item like a grenade or knife. You can choose between Leon Kennedy or Claire Redfield to play as, and after you complete the game with one character, you can switch to the other and experience their campaign as well. Granted, the differences between each campaign aren't too drastic, but it's a good enough excuse to play through the game again, which I absolutely did. If you like horror games, you cannot go wrong with Resident Evil 2. I highly recommend it. And if you end up loving it, then I can also recommend the next game on this list. Number 2, Resident Evil 7. What? You put 2 Resident Evil games on the list? Yes I did, because I fucking love Resident Evil. Capcom had been in a bit of a rut for a while, but thanks to a string of great games culminating in Resident Evil 2 Remake, they had regained some of their reputation for making great games. Resident Evil 7 was the inception of Capcom's comeback. RE7 also revitalized the Resident Evil franchise, which had been a bit lost for a few entries into the series. RE7 brought the franchise back to its survival horror roots while also paying homage to each chapter of the Resident Evil series. The Baker House is as great of a location that you'll find in any RE game, standing alongside the Spencer Mansion or the RCBD station in my opinion. And the Baker family make for some terrifying and memorable enemies. Resident Evil games began with a fixed camera perspective which lasted for a number of years before Resident Evil 4 came along and implemented a third-person camera angle, which remained as the series' default perspective until RE7 released, featuring the first Resident Evil game to be in a first-person POV, or at least the first main entry to the series to be in first person. Personally, I feel that this shift in camera angle really helped ground RE7 in its more visceral horror atmosphere and action. The game has a couple hiccups, the enemy variety is pretty lackluster compared to other games in the franchise, and Ethan Winters, the protagonist of the game, is probably my least favorite protagonist in the franchise. But there's no denying that Resident Evil 7 was the shot in the arm that Resident Evil needed, and I for one am super glad that it happened, and am eagerly anticipating the next game in the series. Number 1. Red Dead Redemption 2. The first Red Dead Redemption held the title of my favorite Rockstar game for a long time, and then Red Dead 2 came out and handily took the title. John Marston is a beloved character for many gamers, myself included, and I was very skeptical before Red Dead 2 came out about if Rockstar could come up with another protagonist I would like as much as John. But Arthur Morgan is every bit as likable as John Marston, and honestly, I like him more. Rockstar games are very peculiar in their design. The movement controls are simultaneously too stiff and too loose, making it harder than it should be to control your character, especially in indoor locations. The gunplay is pretty outdated and plenty of other games do it better. And the slow and sim-like nature of Red Dead 2's open world is definitely not for everyone, but god damn it, it is for me. I don't usually play video games for long sessions at a time. In general, a normal play session can range anywhere from 1.5 hours to 3 hours for me, but Red Dead 2 was the first game I ever played played for 5 hours straight. And then after I took a little break to eat some food, go for a walk and have a shower, I came back to the game and played it for another 5 hours. So 10 hours in a single day. That's just something I don't do, but I did do it for this game. Red Dead 2's world is so entrancing and captivating. Its narrative and characters are so compelling and fleshed out, and its acting and writing are so superb that I just wanted to keep playing. As I said earlier, this game has its flaws, and it is not for everyone, but it was absolutely my favorite gaming experience of the last generation of consoles, and I implore you to try it if you haven't. I'm super excited to see what this next generation of consoles will bring us. Which games will be remembered as the best games on the PS5 and Xbox Series, which is still a really stupid name. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your own list of your favorite games of the last generation. Thanks for watching.